The banners hung heavy in the still air of Station Helios's Memorial Hall, one bearing the deep blues and whites of the United Earth Federation, the other shimmering in iridescent threads of Nerian craft. Artificial breezes circulated above the gathered crowd, but none dared disturb the solemn gravity of the moment. Commander Michael Reeves stood ramrod straight in his press-dress uniform, jaw locked so tightly it ached. His eyes fixed on the casket at the center of the chamber, refusing to stray, though his mind clawed at every memory it could find of Darren Klesch. 3 years they had fought together, from the ice fields of Centuri to the burning skies of Proxima. Darren had been more than a partner in combat. He had been the brother Mike never had, the voice that steadied his aim, the hand that had pulled him back from death's edge more than once. Now all that remained was a coffin wrapped in symbols and silence, and the endless replay of a reactor deck glowing white-hot before Darren disappeared into its storm. "Attention!" Admiral Harrison's command cracked across the chamber like a rifle shot. Hundreds of boots slammed to deck in unison. Mike moved with them, though every motion felt mechanical, as though the grief had hollowed him out and left only a soldier's shell. His steps toward the ceremonial platform were steady, practiced, but inside him was a storm. He could not let the others see Dot. Then he saw her. Across the casket, framed in the glow of the station's cold lights, stood a Nerian woman. Her skin was a polished azure, luminous under the hall's glow, and her hair, if it could be called hair, was a cascade of living light, pale blue braids that shimmered and pulsed faintly, like rivers of moonlit water. She wore a deep green garment that clung to her form with understated elegance, and in the tautness of her posture, Mike saw something he recognized. Discipline forged in disappointment, strength worn like armor. Selina Klesch. Darren had spoken of her often, the sister who chose science over the military, the one their father had scolded for abandoning tradition. Mike had never met her until now, but in that instant he understood why Darren's voice had always carried warmth when he spoke her name. She was not merely beautiful, though she was, undeniably so, but alive with an intensity that seemed to cut through the grief that choked the hall. Together, wordless, they reached for their duty. Mike folded the Earth banner with ritual precision, corners tucked, edges tight. Selina mirrored him with the Nerian flag, her hands steady despite the faint quiver of light in her braids. Their movements aligned as though rehearsed, triangles of cloth rising and falling in perfect symmetry. For a moment, through the fabric between them, Mike felt not the weight of loss, but the strange, undeniable rhythm of connection. When the flags were presented, one to the Admiral, one to the Nerian elder, the casket began its final journey. Slowly, silently, it drifted toward the airlock where the stars awaited. The tradition was older than both their peoples, to release the dead back into the void, to the dust from which all life came. Mike's gaze locked on the coffin as it slipped from light into shadow, swallowed by the dark. His throat burned, but no sound escaped. Soldiers did not weep. Commander Reeves. The voice was soft, melodic, and he turned to find her standing there. Up close, her eyes were darker than her skin, vast and ocean-deep, studying him as though she could read every fracture beneath his armor. "Dr. Klesch," he managed, dipping his head in respect. "Your brother was the finest soldier I've ever known." "Thank you," she said, her voice made almost musical by the translation device at her throat. "Darren spoke of you. He said you were more than a partner, that you were family." Mike swallowed hard. He had no words for the knot that tightened in his chest. Instead, silence stretched between them, charged and fragile. Around them, the hall emptied, footsteps fading into echoes, yet they lingered by the viewport, where Darren's casket had vanished. At last, Selina lowered her gaze. "I should rejoin my delegation." Something in him recoiled at the thought of her leaving, at the finality of it. "Wait," he said, voice dropping to a near whisper. "Your brother didn't die for nothing." There are things you need to know." Her eyes widened just slightly, the braids along her shoulders pulsing with an unreadable flicker of light. "What are you suggesting, Commander?" "Not here." He glanced around, catching sight of Admiral Harrison watching from across the chamber with narrowed eyes. "Observation deck C, third shift. Come alone." She hesitated, a scientist weighing risk against need. Then, with the barest incline of her head, she agreed as she turned away. The shimmer of her braids left an afterimage in Mike's vision, a trail of light like a star slipping into orbit. He stood alone in the hollow of the hall, the storm inside him no quieter, but now joined by something new, something dangerous. The sense that Darren's death had not only left a void, it had opened a path. And Selina Klesch stood at the beginning of it. The observation deck was almost empty at third shift. The stars outside burned like cold fire, scattered across the black. The hum of Station Helios's systems was the only sound, low and steady, as if the great structure itself breathed in its sleep. Commander Michael Reeves stood with his hands clasped behind his back, posture stiff out of habit more than necessity. His reflection in the viewport stared back at him, a man in uniform, jaw clenched, eyes shadowed by too many sleepless nights. The soft hiss of the door broke the quiet. He turned, already knowing who it would be. Selina Klesch stepped inside, her gait purposeful but cautious. Gone was the ceremonial green gown she had worn at the funeral. In its place, she wore a practical coat of woven fabric, its folds catching the station light in a subtle shimmer. Her braids, no longer arranged in aristocratic loops, fell loose around her shoulders, glowing faintly as though they responded to the tension in the air. "Commander," she said, voice low but clear. "Mike," he corrected gently. "No need for titles here." She regarded him for a long moment, then gave the smallest of nods. "You said I needed to know why my brother died." Mike drew a slow breath, choosing his words with care. "The official report says it was an accident, a coolant cascade failure in the Intrepid's reactor. That's what they want everyone to believe. But I saw the logs before they were purged. There were markers, deliberate overrides. Someone sabotaged the ship." Selina's expression hardened, though her braids pulsed with a flicker of uncertain light. "Sabotage? Why would anyone?" "That's what I intend to find out," Mike interrupted, his voice tight. He turned back to the viewport, watching the silent sweep of starlight. Darren didn't stumble into that breach. He discovered something. Something worth killing him over. She moved closer, her reflection joining his in the glass. "You're asking me to believe the military covered up my brother's murder." "I'm not asking," Mike said. "I'm telling you. And if you go to the wrong person with this, you'll end up like him." For a moment, only the hum of the station filled the silence. Selina's braids dimmed, then brightened again, patterns Mike couldn't decipher, but which carried the weight of her conflicted emotions. At last she said, "Why me?" "Why tell me?" He looked at her then, really looked, and for the first time he saw not just Darren's sister, but a woman who carried her own kind of fire. "Because Darren trusted you. He talked about you more than he ever talked about himself. Said you were smarter than both of us put together. Said you didn't quit, no matter how impossible the problem." Her eyes glistened, but she held his gaze steadily. "You knew him in war. I knew him in life. He always carried more than he admitted. If what you say is true, then he carried this too." Mike pulled a small data chip from the inside of his coat, the metal catching the faint light. "This is what I managed to recover before the purge. Not much, but enough to prove I'm not imagining things." Selina reached for it. When their fingers brushed, Mike felt a spark, not the kind of static common to station corridors, but something deeper, sharper, that jolted straight to his chest. Selina felt it too. Her braids glowed brighter, a ripple of golden warmth spreading through the strands before dimming again as she composed herself. "I'll look at it," she said, closing her hand around the chip. "But if you're right, we're standing at the edge of something dangerous." "I know." Mike's voice was steady now, anchored by resolve. "That's why I need your help. Alone, I can't get past locked doors and encrypted walls. But together?" He let the thought hang. Selina studied him, her luminous eyes searching for something: weakness, deceit, or perhaps the truth. Finally, she inclined her head, the decision solidifying in her posture. "Very well. For Darren. But if you've dragged me into some human political game, you'll walk away," Mike finished for her. "And I won't stop you." The door hissed open again, voices echoing faintly down the corridor. Both of them stiffened instinctively, years of caution and survival rising to the surface. Mike glanced toward the sound, then back at Selina. "They're watching me," he said quietly. "And now they'll be watching you." Selina tucked the data chip into her coat, her braids dimming to a resolute blue. "Then we'd better move quickly." For the first time since Darren's death, Mike felt something stir in the hollow his partner had left behind. Not peace, not yet, but a spark. Selina was no soldier, no replacement for the man he'd lost. She was something else entirely. And with her standing beside him, the path forward seemed less like a death march and more like the beginning of a war he intended to win. The service tunnels beneath Station Helios carried a different kind of silence, metallic, oppressive, the kind that pressed against eardrums and magnified every breath. Mike led the way, his boots whispering across grated flooring. His pulse beat harder than his footsteps, the aftertaste of adrenaline sharp in his mouth. The data chip now rested with Selina, tucked into the folds of her coat. That alone made him twice as cautious. She followed without hesitation, her movements fluid despite the unfamiliar environment. She carried herself differently now, not as the polished diplomat he had glimpsed at the funeral, but as someone hardened by necessity. When she stumbled briefly over a protruding conduit, she recovered quickly, her braids flickering a faint indigo. "You're good at this," Mike murmured without turning back. "My brother insisted we all learn to move like shadows," Selina whispered. "He said the universe doesn't wait for scientists." A pang tightened Mike's chest. Darren's lessons lived on and are unpolished, perhaps, but present all the same. A faint vibration shivered through the walls. Mike halted, raising a hand. Voices echoed from the far end of the corridor, the clipped tones of station security. Too close. He gestured Selina toward an access hatch. Together they crouched in the dark as the patrol passed, their light beams slicing across the tunnel before vanishing. Selina's breath was controlled, though he could feel the tension in the space between them. Close enough to hear the faint hum of her translation device. Close enough to catch the subtle, salt-sweet scent of her alien skin. He forced himself to focus forward. This wasn't the time. Once the patrol faded, he keyed open the hatch. Beyond it lay the cargo junction, humming with conveyor drones and stacked crates. In the far corner, a supply shuttle waited, its hull scuffed but spaceworthy. "That's our ride," Mike said. "They'll be watching all official departures," Selina cautioned. Mike's lips curved into a grim half-smile. Who said anything about official? They slipped into the bay, blending with a small group of dockworkers preparing cargo. Selina pulled her hood lower to conceal her glow, while Mike adopted the gait of a man carrying more burden than authority. For a few tense minutes, they moved unnoticed, weaving between crates and machinery until they reached the shuttle's loading ramp. One guard lingered at the base, eyes sweeping the bay. His gaze snagged on Mike, narrowing in suspicion. Mike met his stare head-on, closing the distance with the steady stride of a man who belonged. "Inspection," he said flatly. "Admiral's orders." The guard frowned, recognition dawning too late. Mike struck fast, a sharp blow to the temple, followed by a catch to lower the body silently to the deck. Selena's eyes widened, not in horror, but in quick assessment. "You've done that before," she murmured. "Too many times." Mike caught her wrist gently, guiding her up the ramp. "Come on." Inside, the shuttle's cargo hold smelled of oil and old dust. They found cover between crates of rations, the hum of the engines rising as launch preparations began. The bay door sealed, and for the first time since the funeral, Mike let out a full breath. Selena lowered her hood, her braids glowing faintly in the dim light. The flicker in them was new, softer, tinged with something he couldn't quite name. "You risked everything," she said quietly. "Why?" "Because Darren was my brother," Mike answered without hesitation. "And because someone has to finish what he started." He hesitated, then added more softly, "Because you deserve the truth." The shuttle shuddered as it lifted free of the station, stars opening wide beyond the viewport. Selena braced herself against a crate, her body pressed close to his in the narrow space. For a moment, the chaos outside fell away. Her eyes met his, and the glow of her braids deepened to a warm gold. "Then we see this through," she said, her voice low and steady. The words should have sounded like a pact of duty. Instead, they felt like something more dangerous, a promise forged not just from grief, but from the beginnings of a bond neither of them had expected. And in the hollow where Darren's absence lived, Mike felt the first flicker of something else. Hope, fragile and frightening. Europa Colony gleamed against the void like a string of pearls. Domes and spires pressed beneath a thin atmosphere and the ever-present glare of Jupiter's storms. The shuttle's descent rattled through every seam in its hull, the artificial gravity humming as the docking clamps snapped shut. Mike and Selena waited until the cargo crew dispersed before slipping from the shadows of the storage bay. He moved with the precision of a soldier navigating hostile terrain. She, with a surprising grace, keeping pace at his side. The colony's commercial ring was a kaleidoscope of species and smells, cooked spices from human canteens, resinous oils from Threxian traders, the ozone tang of maintenance droids trundling overhead. Selena pulled her hood forward again, but even veiled, the faint shimmer of her braids caught curious glances. Mike kept her close, one hand hovering near the concealed sidearm beneath his coat. They rented a narrow room in a low-tier hotel, tucked between a repair dock and a gambling den. The walls hummed with recycled air, and the single bed sagged beneath its synthetic sheets. Not a place for comfort, but one where questions weren't asked. Selena wasted no time. She set her pack on the creaking table and withdrew the small data crystal, its facets catching the weak light. "This was hidden in Darren's effects," she explained, her voice measured but taut with emotion. "Encrypted in a cipher, only he and I would know our childhood puzzle, based on the twin moons of Nerea." Mike leaned against the wall, arms folded, watching as she connected the crystal to her portable decoder. Her slender blue fingers moved deftly across the holographic interface, braids pulsing faint blue with concentration. For a long stretch of silence, the only sound was the whir of the machine and the rasp of Mike's breathing. At last the device chimed. Files spilled across the projection images, coded transmissions, fragments of schematics. One name dominated them all. Purity Protocol. "What the hell is this?" Mike muttered, stepping closer. Selena's face was pale, her glow dimmed to a stormy indigo. A faction within the Narian command structure. Genetic purists. They believe the Alliance is weakening us, corrupting our bloodline. According to this, they've infiltrated both governments. Their goal is sabotage, war. Mike's throat tightened. The Intrepid wasn't the end of it, just the start. Her fingers trembled as she opened a video fragment. Darren's face appeared, haggard, eyes ringed with exhaustion. His voice crackled through static. "If you're seeing this, I've been silenced. Trelver's people are inside the command. The alliance isn't safe. Trust only those who bleed for the truth. The feed ended in distortion. Selena's breath hitched, her braids flickering between red and gold. He knew. He tried to warn us. Mike laid a steadying hand on her shoulder. And they killed him for it. Before she could answer, the room's comm panel flashed red. External override. A voice boomed from the corridor beyond sharp, commanding, and unmistakably Narian. Open this door. Now. Selena's eyes widened, fear warring with fury. Mike drew his sidearm, his expression hardening. They found us faster than I thought. The panel sparked as the lock began to burn out. Selena grabbed the data crystal, clutching it to her chest. Mike positioned himself between her and the door. Stay behind me. If we're lucky, this is only a retrieval team. The lock blew with a burst of ozone, and the door hissed open. Silhouetted in the glare of the corridor lights stood 4 armed guards, and behind them, a tall figure with silver-braided hair and eyes like shards of ice. Selena gasped. High Commander Trelver. The Narian purist inclined his head with a predator's smile. My dear Selena, how tragic that grief has led you into treason. Hand me the crystal, and perhaps I'll let your human friend live long enough to regret his mistake. Mike raised his weapon. You'll have to kill me first. The air in the room seemed to constrict, thick with the inevitability of violence. Selena's braids flared crimson as she stepped closer to Mike, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. Then we stand together. For the first time, Mike realized this wasn't only Darren's fight anymore. It was theirs. The crack of stunned fire split the air before Mike could squeeze his trigger. The first bolt slammed into his shoulder, pain flaring white-hot and stealing his balance. He fired back anyway, his shot forcing one guard to dive for cover. Selena cried out as armored hands seized her arm, wrenching her away from him. Mike staggered forward, desperate to reach her, but Trelver's shadow loomed in the haze of smoke. The High Commander struck with inhuman speed, a backhand across Mike's jaw that sent him crashing to the floor. Stars burst across his vision. Restrain him, Trelver ordered. Voice cold and measured dot energy bands snapped tight around Mike's wrists, glowing restraints that hummed against his skin. He fought against them, but every movement sent a jolt of numbing current through his nerves. He caught one last glimpse of Selena as the guards dragged him away, her braids flashing crimson alarm. Her eyes locked on his with fierce refusal. Then the door sealed between them. He awoke strapped to a chair in a sterile interrogation room. The restraints pulsed with faint blue light, binding him in place. His shoulder throbbed where the stun blast had landed, but the pain kept him sharp. Trelver circled him like a predator. Humans are remarkable, the Narian said softly, his silver braids glinting under the overhead light. So fragile in form, yet so unwilling to break. Mike forced a grin despite the blood at the corner of his mouth. Funny, I was thinking the same about you purists. Advanced tech, backwards thinking. The commander's braids flickered a dull red. Irritation. Good. Mike leaned into it. You killed Darren because he knew too much, Mike pressed, his voice rough but steady. But you made a mistake. You left enough for me to find. Trelver's smile sharpened. You overestimate your reach, Commander. The transmission you attempted was intercepted. No one will ever hear of the Purity Protocol. And as for Dr. Klesch, he leaned closer, eyes narrowing. She will learn what happens to traitors of her bloodline. Mike's pulse spiked, but he held Trelver's gaze with iron defiance. Touch her, and I'll take you with me to hell. The Narian only laughed, a low, humorless sound. Empty threats from a dying soldier. The door hissed open. A guard whispered urgently into Trelver's ear, and for the first time, the commander's composure slipped. His braids flashed with alarm. Impossible, he snarled. He turned on Mike with sudden fury. It seems your human allies received more of your message than I anticipated. They demand your release. Mike hid his surge of relief behind a smirk. Told you we'd win. Trelver's expression hardened. This changes nothing. The purity protocol is already in motion. By this time tomorrow, your alliance will be ashes. He stormed from the room, leaving Mike strapped and aching but alive, his mind burning with a single thought: Selena. Had she escaped? Was she safe? Elsewhere in Europa Colony, Selena stood before the Alliance Command Center's council chamber. Blood seeped through the bandage on her arm, but her voice did not waver. High Commander Trelver murdered my brother. He holds Commander Reeves in violation of every treaty our people swore to honor. And worse, he plots to sabotage 3 of your starbases. Thousands will die unless we act now. Admiral Gardner's silver-streaked hair caught the glow of the holoscreens as she studied Selena with sharp eyes. That's a bold accusation, Doctor. Do you have proof? Selena lifted Darren's crystal, now fully decrypted. Files and images cascaded into the air between them. Schematics, intercepted transmissions, orders signed with Trelver's seal. This is Darren's work. He died to protect it. I will not let his sacrifice be in vain. The chamber fell silent. The weight of her words hung heavier than gravity. Admiral Gardner leaned back slowly, her expression unreadable. Then she gave a single nod. Very well. We prepare a strike team. But understand this, Dr. Klesch, once we cross that line, there's no going back. Selena's braids pulsed with fierce gold, her eyes burning with the resolve Mike had seen in Darren and now saw magnified in her. I've already crossed it. The stealth shuttle slid into Europa's night side, hugging the outer rim of the colony. Its engines purred so softly, the hum was lost beneath the pulse of adrenaline in Selena's ears. She sat strapped beside Commander Foster, the compact, scar-jawed soldier who radiated calm like a blade in its sheath. Across from them, 3 Narian loyalist officers checked their weapons with silent precision. Mike's face haunted every flicker of Selena's thoughts. Bound, beaten, but alive, that was the image she carried like a burning coal inside her. She pressed one hand to Darren's crystal, tucked safely against her chest, and let its cool edges ground her. Foster's voice cut through the hush. Detention level, 2 floors beneath the embassy's main hall. Expect resistance, especially from Trelver's personal guard. Her gaze flicked toward Selena. Doctor, you stay close to me. Use that stun pistol if you must, but don't hesitate. Hesitation gets people killed. Selena met her eyes steadily. My brother didn't raise me to hesitate. The shuttle docked at an emergency hatch. In practiced formation, the team slipped inside the embassy's maintenance corridors. The air smelled faintly of ozone and cleaning solvents, too sterile to mask the tension building with every step. The first opposition came fast. Purist loyalists blocked the lower stairwell, their weapons spitting bright arcs of stun fire. Foster's soldiers returned with disciplined bursts, dropping 2 before the others scrambled for cover. Selena pressed herself against the bulkhead, heart hammering, until instinct overcame fear. She leaned out, raised her pistol, and fired. One shot struck true, dropping a guard where he crouched. Her hands trembled, but she didn't lower the weapon. Foster glanced at her, something like respect flickering in the commander's eyes. Not bad for a scientist. They pushed deeper, alarms wailing overhead. Red light washed the walls, turning every face and shadow into something fierce. At last they reached the detention block. Selena could feel him before she saw him, the sharp certainty that Mike was near. A live dot, and then he was dot 3rd cell on the left, slumped in a chair, restraints glowing against his wrists. His head lifted sluggishly at the sound of weapons fire, eyes widening when they found her. Took you long enough, he rasped, mouth curving into a grin, even through the blood. Selena's chest clenched with relief, so fierce it hurt. She rushed to the console, fingers flying across the unfamiliar interface until the barrier fizzled out. Dropping the pistol, she tore at the restraints until they snapped, energy humming against her palms. Mike's hands were free. He reached for hers immediately, their fingers interlacing human tan against Narian blue. For a moment, there was no war, no alarms, just the electric connection of survival, reunion, and something unspoken that burned between them. Behind them, Foster barked, "We're not done yet." Trelver's on the move, headed for the docking bay with a shuttle. "And we've got reports of explosives planted throughout the embassy." Mike staggered to his feet, wincing from his injuries, but his eyes burned with soldiers' fire. "Then we don't stop here. We end this." Selina slid under his arm, lending support as the team regrouped. For the first time since Darren's death, she felt not only grief but resolve. Together, she and Mike would finish what her brother started. The klaxons screamed louder, echoing through the corridors. Somewhere ahead, Trelver waited, with detonator codes and the power to ignite war. The docking bay was a storm of sound and light, alarms shrieking, emergency strobes flashing across metal bulkheads. Trelver's sleek shuttle crouched at the far end of the hangar, engines spooling with a hungry whine. 2 loyalist guards stood at the ramp, weapons ready, their eyes scanning the chaos. Mike leaned heavily on Selina's shoulder as they slipped into cover, behind a stack of freight containers. His injured shoulder screamed with every movement, but he forced himself upright, adrenaline masking pain. Across the hangar, Trelver appeared, silver braids glinting, his tall frame taut with fury. In his hand was a control device, small and terrible in its simplicity. "The detonation codes," Mike muttered. "Starbase Proxima, Ardent, Halcyon, all wired to blow if he presses that button." Selina's braids pulsed a sharp crimson. "Thousands will die." Mike's eyes narrowed, battle instincts calculating distances, angles, outcomes. "We need a distraction. If I shoot, he'll reflex trigger." Selina followed his gaze, spotting the glowing external power coupling on the shuttle's flank. Understanding flashed instantly. If it overloads, he'll flinch. Their eyes met, silent agreement forged in fire. Mike rose, weapon trained loosely to keep Trelver's attention. "It's over, Trelver." "Drop it." The purest commander's laugh echoed cold across the bay. "Over? You've merely delayed the inevitable. The Alliance will choke on its own weakness, and my people will be reborn pure." He lifted the device, thumb poised. "Not today," Mike said. Selina's shot cracked the air, striking the coupling. Sparks exploded in a blinding shower, the shuttle's hull screaming as energy arced across its plating. Trelver flinched, just as planned. Mike lunged forward, slamming into him with a soldier's momentum. The 2 men crashed to the deck, rolling, grappling, fists and elbows striking with bone-crunching force. Trelver was stronger than Mike expected. Mike had something the purist lacked, training born of desperation, and Darren's memory fueling every strike. He drove his fist into the nerve cluster at the base of Trelver's neck, the one Darren had shown him years ago in a sweaty sparring ring. The commander went rigid, then collapsed with a strangled gasp. Selina snatched the device from the deck, clutching it to her chest as if it were her brother's life itself. "I have it," she called, breathless. "The codes are secure." The guards surrendered as Alliance soldiers poured into the bay. Within moments, Trelver was bound, dragged away, still seething, his braids flashing rage red. The detonator was rushed to Admiral Gardner's team, who confirmed the sabotage had been neutralized. The bay fell quiet, save for the hum of deactivated engines. Mike sank against the wall, exhausted, his body trembling from injury and relief. Selina dropped to her knees beside him, her braids glowing a warm, steady gold. "You should be in medical," she murmured, brushing a bloodstain from his jaw. He caught her hand, holding it against his chest. What I need is to know what happens next for us." Her lips parted, surprise flickering across her face before softening into something deeper. "You humans," she whispered, a faint smile curving. "Always so direct. Only when it matters." His thumb traced the glowing strands of her braids. "And you matter, Selena." The golden light deepened, radiant in the gloom. She leaned closer, voice low, intimate. "On Nerea, we say the stars align once in a lifetime. I think perhaps ours have aligned." Mike Reeves. Their lips met, hesitant at first, then fierce, a promise made in the shadow of war. Later, aboard the newly commissioned Darren's Legacy, they stood together at the observation deck. Beyond the viewport, stars wheeled in silence, indifferent yet eternal. Selena rested her head against Mike's shoulder, her braids glowing with quiet contentment. Darren would have approved. Mike said softly. Selena smiled, bittersweet. "He always said humans were the best thing to happen to our people. I think I understand why." Then the ship's AI chimed. A final file from Darren's crystal had been decrypted, its header glowing across the console. For Selena and Mike. Selena's breath caught as she opened it. Darren's recorded voice filled the cabin, worn but steady. "If you're hearing this, then I didn't make it. Mike, watch over my sister. She'll never admit it, but she needs someone who believes in her as fiercely as I do. And Selena, trust him. He'll fight for you even when you can't fight for yourself. If the two of you stand together, then maybe the Alliance still has a chance." The message ended, leaving only silence and the sweep of starlight. Mike's throat tightened. Selena's hand found his, fingers lacing without hesitation. The final shocking truth was simple, undeniable, and seared into them both. Darren hadn't just died for the Alliance. He had trusted this very bond to be the legacy that would carry them forward. Together, human and Narian, soldier and scientist, they turned to face the stars, no longer alone, and no longer bound by grief, but by something far stronger.